And we are live, and welcome to today's masterclass, which is entitled The Roadmap, or the Masterclass for Your Accounts Payable Roadmap, which is just such an important topic for us, anybody in accounts payable, about what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve. And today I'm joined by partners of ours, Crown Record Management. So Michelle Kermath, happy birthday, by the way, Michelle.
Thank you very much.
We'll ask you to introduce yourself, and Anthony Biondi. Hey, Anthony, how are you?
Fine, thank you, Jamie.
Very good. So before we start, Michelle, do you want to introduce yourself so the audience know who you are? I'm Jamie Radford, by the way, CEO and founder of the APA. Michelle, could you want to introduce yourself?
Yep, so I'm Michelle Kermath. I head up the technology and consultancy piece for ECM at Crown Records Management.
Thank you, Michelle. And Anthony?
Hi, everyone. Anthony Biondi. I head up our ECM business unit within Crown Records Management.
Excellent, thank you both. So today we're going to talk about the topic of the roadmap for accounts payable, and we're going to take you on a bit of a journey. So if we can get the first slide, if you don't mind, Anthony, and I'm going to hand over to Michelle, and if you want to give us an outline of what we're talking about today and what we're trying to achieve, if that's okay.
Yep, so hopefully everyone, you can see on the screen, what I've done is broken down here the process of the 4 steps that build up the process. Now, the process to get any information out of is the same: engage, capture, analyze, present. And you can do that across any process, be that HR, but obviously today we're focusing on AP. But the idea of it is today is to go through those 4 elements of the process review and what we generally do at each stage of that process, and how we engage with the clients, how you can get that information out, what you can do with that information, and then the possibilities with that at the end. So it's very much a step-by-step process.
It's probably worth doing a quick introduction as to what we see a business process doing in terms of the purpose of doing it, what the outcome might be, so that you've got our listeners have got some context as we go through this journey as to what we're trying to achieve. And ultimately a business process review, and Michelle has touched on it there, it doesn't have to be just of accounts payable. We're talking about it in the accounts payable world at this moment in time, but it applies to any business function, is trying to understand the bottlenecks associated with what you're currently doing. Looking at it from a compliance perspective, looking at it from a technology perspective, the individuals within your team, looking at the time they're spending on certain tasks, and how that operation is impacting everything that you do on a day-to-day business, from a day-to-day perspective within the AP department, but also the impact that has potentially on the wider business, including how you engage with your suppliers and your customers and things like that. So ultimately, what we're trying to help you do in this process is get a better handle of where your problems are within that process, where your costs might be, the implication of all of that, and then try and give you a view of what a new world might look like. And this masterclass is all about getting you through that journey, identifying some of the things that people tend to misinterpret with this particular process, and address any of the questions or concerns that you might have throughout it as well. So just a little introduction as to why we do them, what they do, as that might help you from a context perspective as we go through those 4 pillars that Michelle's put up on the screen.
Lovely, thank you both. And for anybody that's watching or watching back, if you have a question for our panel today, including myself, could you pop it in the questions section, and we will either, as we're going through, if the question's relevant, we'll answer it as we can, or we might have a little bit of the time at the end of this session to go back on that. And just before we get to the very first slide, this is a series. So we are doing a masterclass approach in a series approach. So if you've got comments or anything else you'd like to know in this series that we're running with Crown, let us know after the session as well, and we'll pass it on to Anthony and Michelle. So let's go on to the first slide then, which is all about engage, I believe.
It is, and engage really can encompass the planning, really. So it's about getting to understand what is the issue with what are we addressing, what is the objectives, what's in scope of a business process review, and actually clearly identifying the deliverables for a customer, or if you're doing it yourself, your own business. So there always needs to be a clear set of what's in scope, what's out of scope, and what we're trying to achieve and why. So the engaging is around understanding that before you can then move into the planning stage, and it's a very key planning stage, and you need to make sure that you've got all of your ducks in a row, so that the next 3 elements all work smoothly. So there's a lot of project planning or planning your approach. For instance, you need to identify all of your key stakeholders. So by identifying all your key stakeholders, you can then work out how you will actually engage with each of those stakeholders. How involved will they be in the process review? Are they information only? Are they active users? And it's those sorts of things that you really need to get into place in the engage phase.
And from your, sorry, Anthony, carry on.
No, go on, Jamie, carry on, mate.
And sort of, you know, in terms of the information that you're collecting, typically, what does it look like? What are you trying to define at the very early stages? What information are you trying to collate?
Yep. So initially, you're definitely identifying what processes are involved, who are the key users and key stakeholders. So initially, there's always a project sponsor or a process owner. In this case, an accounts payable manager, so it was clearly going to be the process owner. And then you start with that context with them. You'll have an initial conversation with them, getting to know the background, the scope, like I said, the aims and objectives. Then from there, you will work out the key users, and that's not necessarily people who are doing the accounts payable process. It could be people that touch the process or support the process, or also an organisation chart at this point is quite key to get, so you can start to address who and what. Once you've got all of those users, you can then put them into this sort of stakeholder matrix and understand what involvement there'll be, because it's in this engage stage, you really need to plan the amount of time and commitment that people need to put into to the future stages. So that's the sort of information you'll get, and you'll work out whether you're going to do surveys with these people, one-to-ones or workshops and things like that. So you can then get all of that information up front in the engaged planning stage and a schedule.
Great, thank you. And Anthony?
Yeah, just to add to that, I guess in its most simplistic sense, this is the stage of the process that arguably is the most important in terms of getting the best out of the entire business process review, because as Michelle has touched on, we're looking at people and who touches that process, the people within it, understanding each one of their roles, and that takes time. That's not a quick 30-second conversation. So understanding those in advance, who those people are, how long we need to engage them with them, helps departments plan for this, because the last thing we want to do is come in and disrupt what people are supposed to be doing on a day-to-day basis. That's not our objective at all. So understanding the people, who they are, can then help us paint a picture and set the agenda in advance so that we can plan accordingly around your timetables, your workloads, and make sure that the impact on your day-to-day running is minimal. It also helps us look at the technology as well. More often than not, IT at some point need to be involved in this process, whether that be to understand what you've currently got, or whether it be to educate them on the art of the possible from a new world perspective. So engaging with them at the front end and making sure that their schedules are aligned with what we're trying to achieve is just as important as the people within the process itself. And then that infrastructure that we have an understanding of then enables Michelle, before she comes on site, to start thinking about what that process might look like through our experience, from previous experience, because we've done this multiple times with organizations that have got 2-man and girls accounts payable teams, or 50. So once we've got an understanding of the infrastructure and how many invoices you process, how many systems you use, Michelle, in advance of this process, can start sitting down and thinking about the types of questions she needs to ask, which again has less of an impact on the people involved in the discovery process, and less of an impact on their time.
Absolutely, and just to build on that, a lot of people as well are a lot further down different journeys, Jamie. So you could have someone who's not sort of thought about, you know, the digital transformation element or what they're doing, or there's a lot of people that have gone that far, mapped their current state, and it's about how they deal with those issues and gaps. So in the engage stage, you've really got to work out where on the journey, I know that's a real cheesy word, journey, but where they are on the journey will also help shape the type of engagement that you're going to do.
And that was a question for both of you, really. So, I mean, I've worked with Anthony for a period of time, and I'm guessing it's not a one-size-fits-all model. You know, you've got to, at the engage stage, you've got to address where they are, like you said, Michelle, what they're trying to achieve, actually, you know, what they're trying to get out of this. So the important part is, it's like a process, accounts payable process. the more quality data or the quality information you start with will improve the process. And is that how you follow? Is that the process that you follow? It isn't a one size fits all?
Absolutely, absolutely. There is an underlying element of, there's key elements of the process you need to follow, like the 4 pillars we initially put up. But around those, each one will have their own variations and nuances, and it's in this engage stage that you can shape that and make sure that you've got the right process in place to achieve the deliverables that you've also agreed in this stage.
Let's be honest, right? That we're not bringing any expertise to anyone that we're going to be talking to with regards to their processes. Nobody knows their processes better than the people we're going to be talking to. No one knows the impact that that's having on their workload or on the wider business or their business's general objectives over the next 6, 12, 18 months and beyond. We're not bringing that to the party. What we're bringing is an expertise to structure those conversations so that at the end of it, we produce a report that gives you some context as to how you might want to improve it, how things could be better placed for you. So this is absolutely a two-way street. As much as we're bringing previous experience and structure to this, we're wholly reliant on individuals embracing that, engaging with us and opening up. It can't happen otherwise. It's just a bunch of people walking in telling you do this, do that, and it means nothing to anybody.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think, when you look at an accounts payable function, which obviously the basis of the masterclass days is very focused around accounts payable and procure to pay, but I know that you business process all processes, but it's a scary, daunting process because you're going to review something, one, that you think you know, and two, you're going to unearth things that you may not know. So you're right, it's a two-way communication. You guys aren't going to be necessarily the experts, but what you'll offer is a balanced approach. You'll offer the structure, you'll offer your views, and then like a workshop would, no doubt you'll come up with a structure of what you're trying to achieve. So on that, so should we move to the next slide and talk a little bit about the capture side? Because I think when we talk about capture, for me, we can see, in the old days you talk about invoice capture, but in a process, we're talking about the capture of relevant information, and there's multiple people involved. Is that right, Michelle?
Absolutely. So in your planning stage, you will have identified your key stakeholders and how you're going to engage in that with them. And ultimately, the end game is to understand the process end to end, the trigger points, the inputs and outputs, how they happen. Is that electronically, manually? Is there a user element to it all? And that's probably the longest part of this process. And that's where, as Anthony said earlier, it's the commitment of spending time with the people that are doing the actual job. At the end of the day, they're the experts. What someone like me doing coming in is actually being able to see it holistically. So a lot of people know their element and what they do, but not necessarily the impact of the next bit on. So I can capture all of the strands and bring it all together, so it's got one underlying approach. And a key part in capturing is shadowing, and we can't, there's an element of, I can capture everything in a workshop, I can map it out in a lovely swim lane and process map, but to really know whether that's what's happening on the ground for all the different users is shadowing it and seeing what they actually work and go through each day for their tasks. And the end result, and
that's why it's sorry.
I was going to say the end result on screen is a very high level sort of capture process, but ultimately each one of those steps on screen, you'd have further information of who's doing it, what they're using to do it, what their tools are, and what the outcome of each step is. And that's sort of what you're seeing on screen.
I was just going to add a couple of things. First and foremost, it's that shadowing process and that engagement element that is why it's so important that this gets the buy-in from the senior individuals right from day one. It's got to be seen as a positive element. We want people involved in this, so that we get the real information as to what's really going on, because I can tell you I've done many of these over the years, and Michelle can back this up, where you've got executives on one side of the table and the end users on the other, and more often than not the executives don't really have an understanding of what's going on a day-to-day basis. That's not a criticism, that's just the way of the world. They're not supposed to have a deep understanding of what goes on. But what that really means is if you don't really have a deep understanding of what's going on, you can't really understand what the impact is. So we want the people that are involved in this to have the freedom to express where the bottlenecks are, what the problems are, what the headaches are, what's good about the process, without fear of, is my job on the line here, or am I due to be replaced by a computer or a robot? It's absolutely not the objective. Our objective is to get to the truth of what's really going on, so we can help the people that are currently doing it fill the gaps with technology, or potentially congratulate them on what a great job they're already doing, and therefore not recommend anything. But ultimately, it's important that this comes from the top down. And the second reason we want to get everybody involved is not just so we can get to the truth and the real depths of what's going on, but also so they can feel involved in shaping the new way of working. This is not about us coming in going, what you're doing there is rubbish, don't do that, do this. Absolutely not our approach. Our approach is, do you know what? Of your 10 steps of your process, 6 of them are really good. But if you were to implement this process or implement this piece of technology, the remaining 4 will take you half the time, or actually you don't need to do them at all. So that's our philosophy, that's our approach. And if people can come to it with that mindset, as it's a positive thing, it's not a threat in any way, shape or form, then the end result tends to be more impactful.
Totally agree, and I think what I'd add there for both of you, I think you're absolutely right, both. And from a standpoint of our members, the AP community, it's like Chinese whispers, isn't it? You start with the truth, and then it gets passed along a line, and by the time the last person in the line has been trained or communicated with, it's totally different to what it started with. And this is what this capture bit is, I assume. It's a version of the truth, which you get everybody involved. You've got to be honest. You've got to be, being ready to commit and actually expect the unexpected, because a lot of the time in my old consulting days, I used to map processes, swim lane and processes. And then when you show people back, they were absolutely shocked and amazed, because actually others see things differently. And is that what you unearth? And is that what you find at this stage when you do the capture?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you tend to, you've hit a very good point there, Jamie, is actually you do need to deliver it back and confirm what you've captured, and that is a key part of this stage. So you capture every part of the process, and someone might not realize that something that they did actually makes a huge effect for the next part of the process, or their task actually is a key element, and if something was done differently, it has a massive impact. So yeah, in this capturing stage, it's quite interesting when you show all the different parts of the process and the ins and outs, that people really start to see the whole thing end to end. I think we're jumping a little to present there, but yes, in capture, it's very key to get the information from every user for every part of the process, because that also identifies where the gaps are that Anthony was touching on, but also the risks in the process and the main issues.
And again, to reiterate something we mentioned when speaking on the first slide, this is a two-way street. So while Michelle will be shadowing and asking questions, that can come the other way. There's no harm in these in individuals within the department saying, how have you seen this done before? Is this the first time you've ever experienced this? Do you recommend, the consultancy process doesn't start at the end of this when we give you a document. It starts now. This is the consultancy bit, and there's snippets of information that people can get just from having Michelle on site, or any one of Michelle's team on site, working with the end users, working with the AP managers or the finance directors or anybody else that touches this process. It's as much their opportunity to ask us questions as it is for us to find out what's going on in the department itself.
Brilliant. And although I know it looks like a busy slide, and I think you've purposely done that because you need to show there is some complexity and that there's ways of doing it. I mean, in terms of, again, from our audience perspective, time lapses, how long would you expect this process to last ordinarily in a business?
Do you mean how long is the capture stage?
Yeah, if you could, yeah.
Yeah, so I think Anthony touched at the very beginning that you can have 2 users, you can have 50 users. So there is an element in the engagement where we work out how long this process would take. We typically like to say that sort of one AP process should take about 5 days in all, but that's in all. So the capture stage of this, I'd like to think, is a couple of days.
Okay.
You've got
And again, I think
and
from
it doesn't have to be. Sorry, Jamie. Go on, mate. Sorry. No, please carry on.
Yeah, I think from our audience point of view, that'd be quite eye-opening also, because the assumption would be this could take weeks, months, even years. So if it's a couple of days, you're looking for a high-level view, no doubt. You're looking for a version of the truth, which then I think leads us quite nicely where capture and analyze sort of overlap a little. Is that what I think the next slide, if we go to the next slide, this is where it's not quite clear where and a line of the understanding where companies' internal processes sort of align. Is that where these two merge and overlap a little bit, Michelle?
They do, because you've obviously got your current state process, and as part of that, you'll be looking at, or I'd be looking at, how long does a task take, and you can do quite, that's capturing all of the stats and the volumes and all of the information. But what you need to do with that is also work out all the stuff in between. So the wait, what I would class as a wait time. So okay, this task might take 30 minutes, but we have to wait a whole day for that information to get here on a van or downloaded overnight or what have you. So we capture all of those bits of information, and then you have to start analysing that information. So how long does a whole process work cycle take? How much of that can I get out of sort of KPIs and reporting? So you're matching sort of KPIs to the actual stuff that you've captured on site. So there's quite a significant bit of analysis time. So when I said 5 days, but 2 days is capture, the analysts themselves has a significant amount of time to then go through all of that data against the sort of reporting data that you would have also have captured, and then sort of mix the two together to come out with a full end report.
Now I'm going to do a bit of a cheesy plug now, forgive me, but I wrote a piece that has appeared on your website and via social media and is on ours, which is about talking about the reasons that why you would go digital, and there's 6 or 7 of those that we document in this white paper that talks about each reason typically why any organization or why any from a departmental perspective tends to go digital. And that's everything from cost and efficiency to sustainability to remote working, compliance, security, mobile. There's 7 or 8 in there. It's a good read, great read. Check it out. But more importantly, relevant to this, at the engage stage, that's what we're looking for with the organization as well, because a return on investment, which is what we're now starting to get into, means different things to different people. You've got tangible costs, you've got intangible costs. Some people are looking to save on time. Some people are looking to improve from a sustainability perspective, using less paper, that type of stuff. So understanding what their objectives are at the front end is a key point. Some organizations don't know. You can't make a decision on that without understanding where your costs are. So in this section, we start to figure out where your low-hanging fruit might be in terms of getting your money back and what that money back might look like. And we'll touch on that in a little bit more when we get to the depths of the analysis and the present piece.
Brilliant, thank you. And so talk me through the most costly elements of an existing process, for instance, time, materials, systems, etc.
I think there's a statistic, but don't ask me whose statistic it is, because I can't remember off the top of my head. But it's 30% of rework costs companies 30% of their revenue, and the issue is that they're not generally getting the right information up front or into the systems or into the right people at the right time. So they have to go back at the beginning stages of the process. They have to go back and get some more information, or they have to get the correct information. And so the most costly element really is, if you pin it down to the root cause analysis of that, is just getting the right information to the right person at the right time. So depending on what your service you're doing, so an AP process will be very much around getting the right information off the invoice, routing it to the right person for approval, or even taking out that approval step and doing it automatically if it matches. So it's usually it's the rework, or the having to go back and get more information is a very costly element.
It's also once the process has kicked off with any one particular invoice, or beyond the point of completion of paying that invoice, you've then got what's the impact of that on the business from an operational perspective, and also from a cost perspective. What has processing that invoice physically cost me, i.e. the cost of that particular invoice and the time that it's taken for it to get through the system. Because you're digitizing it, because you've now got an idea of the process and you can streamline that process in multiple different ways, you've got more control and visibility of it, which means at the end of it, you can have, or in fact during, you can have and make informed business decisions relevant to what's happening in reality, rather than waiting for the fact and being reactive to what's going on within the business. And a big part of this process is helping you understand the power of that, and that's relative to the different size of organizations. Just because you're only processing a few thousand invoices and have got 2 people, it's still relative to how powerful it is versus an organization that's processing tens of thousands of invoices with tens, if not 50, 10, 20, 30 people in their AP department. It's all relative to what you're trying to achieve as a business, and understanding and analyzing that process gives you a clear picture as to what that's costing you and how it can be improved.
Lovely, thank you. And before we move to the next slide, which I know we're going to get into a little bit more depth on analyze, there's a question or more of a comment that's come through from one of our members, Suzanne, who's a very process oriented, I'll tell you that. So comment is, so you need to gather the voice of the customer and the voice of the business, and I think that's quite important actually. I think that goes across whenever you're doing a business process review. The voice of the customer and the voice of the business are really important factors.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you ideally, when you're in your engagement plan at the beginning, one of your key stakeholders is going to be the customer, and how you engage with them and how you get them involved in the process. So absolutely.
Perfect. So if we go on to the next slide, Anthony, and I think we're going to delve a little bit more into the analyze side. So I'm going to hand over to you on this one, Michelle. So there's a few statistics or a pie chart there. So let us know what this slide's all about.
So in the capture stage, you've obviously caught who's doing what, and you've also will have caught the issues and the bottlenecks and things that we discussed earlier. Part of the analyze stage is to do a root cause analysis on that and just keep coming back and grading those. So there's lots of different ways to do it. I had multiple charts, so what to put on the screen was hard to choose from. But ultimately, you do try and get them down into 3 key areas: so people, process, and technology, because then you can start to hone in onto the solutions in each of those elements going forward. But on top of this, you might also put some root cause analysis issues around there and trying to group them into 5. Then you can get really geeky and start doing a Pareto analysis around it, and then working out the 80-20 rule and stuff. So there's a whole load of analysis that you can put in at this stage. But ultimately, what you're trying to do is work out, what's the biggest inefficiency? Is that caused by 80% of things you do or 20% of the things that you do? Is it your technology that's causing the issues? Is it your lack of technology that's causing the issues? And really trying to pin down the root causes of these so that you can then build your future solution on top of this. And when we look at an accounts payable process, you could say that the stages of an accounts payable process are very much the same. But as I think we mentioned earlier, it's the nuances of a company and the data and how they work, and quite often companies have grown and they've been successful, so they've had to put processes in place quite quickly. So these bespoke processes and workaround processes become the norm, and it's picking those apart in this stage, in the analyze stage, and understanding those nuances and the statutory requirements and things that help resolve these issues and later down the line in your future state.
Okay.
And it's not just the time that Michelle takes at this stage to understand what we've collated from a capture perspective. It's also then documenting it in a way that's presentable back to the customer, so they actually understand what it is we're on about. That process is obviously just as important as the analyzing itself, because what we don't want to do is present something back to an organization that makes no sense, or they can't follow the pattern of it, they can't follow the root causes. So in addition to the analyzing that Michelle does, we then break that out into different sections, and as we talk about the present stage in a moment, that makes identifying which one to target first, it makes understanding why those are important, and it makes articulating the possible solution much more effective and efficient, and enables any organization that then gets the end result from us to clearly strategize, right, this is where we're going to focus, this is why, and this is how we're going to solve those problems. So the analysing is one step of the analysing, but then documenting it in a way that makes sense is the second step.
It's about facts, isn't it? It's about giving this analyze stage is about saying, yes, we know we wanted to do this, and we know we've caught this, and these are actually the facts back, and these are how I got to those facts, and that's what we present in the presenting stage.
And again, I mean, this is more of a sort of a statement of fact, I suppose, but when analysing the findings, is this where we're working with teams that have experience of working with other organisations to solve their issues really stands out? And just explain, if that's the case, why is that the case?
It is because, as I said, an accounts payable process can be the same, but everybody only knows the way that they do it. And so to them, that is the normal way. So if I can go on site and do the accounts payable process in multiple different industries, and therefore that brings its own different slants and changes on it. And I may have come across a process or a problem or an issue in that one that we've resolved that you can then take into the new. It's like benchmarking on a much bigger scale. And then the benefits of the solutions and the services that we provide, so the sort of the background support that I have as an analyst here at Crown is that there's multiple solutions and services that I can offer back, and knowing how they work can help shape the future state as well.
Perfect. And I think the next slide delves in a little bit more detail, doesn't it? I think if you want to explain that slide to us, Michelle, because I think you're delving in a little bit even more depth on this one.
Yes, exactly. So, the first one showed the people, process, technology. Then the next one is where I start looking at the individual issues, and you start to rate them. So you put like a matrix against them. And in this sort of one that I've shown here is I use these 5 things or 6 things as the key root cause issues, and then I map each of the ones that I've come across. And for instance, in this one, I've put that there were 68 current state issues that were logged when I went through the whole process with the users in workshops or interviews or shadowing. And then all of those 68 I mapped against these 6. And then in the bottom table there, you can then really start to pin down quite easily that, it was inefficient process or a lack of automation are the two key things. And ultimately, the inefficient process and the lack of automation can also link together quite well, because you need to get your processes right and efficient first before you apply any automation anyway. So actually, if you just stand alone and look at the process and streamline all the waste out of that first and then apply automation, you've got a much more effective process. So this is helping you really pin down on those areas to focus on that will give you the biggest wins first.
And in your experience, Anthony, I mean, you've been in this a long time, nearly as long as me. We accounts payable folk, we're a resilient bunch. We've got broad shoulders, thick skin. But how do organisations react when you're effectively looking under the microscope? You're highlighting some inefficiencies. So what's their reaction? What's that normally look like?
Typically positive. I think I've certainly never had anybody in a meeting where we've presented something like this go, that's a load of codswallop, I don't believe that, or I don't buy into it. I think it's eye-opening. And as I said earlier, you've got to be brave with this. There's an element of you're going to hear some things that are a bit uncomfortable and that aren't overly difficult, easy to digest. But I think, again, it comes back to what I mentioned earlier. If we understand the root causes, or what you're trying to achieve at the front end within the engage process, it softens the blow a little bit here, because this is not about you don't do this very well, you don't do that very well, look how you failed here, etc., etc. This is not about this is not a finger pointing exercise. It's very much a look at all of the things you could be doing better to help improve this process. And so this is just the uncomfortable bit that highlights where we can help you improve, and we spin it in a positive way, in the sense of giving you comfort as to that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and we can shape it to do things better. I think that the thing that more often than not happens is surprise. I think when people really start to understand the cost implications of what they do on a day-to-day basis, most organizations take a bit of a step back and take a little time to digest that, but that's just a perfectly natural reaction. Did that answer your question?
Absolutely. And is it the same for you, Michelle?
I can say most companies will have a handle on certain issues. You know, they're the ones that are dealing with it every day, seeing it in their reports and things. So quite often they've got an idea of a few of the issues. What they don't know is yeah, maybe the scale or the cost, or actually how to change it without it. You know, what's the impact on this process, the user, the customer, if we make this change here? And it's actually having that information. Well, if we unpick this part, actually what we need to do is make sure these three things are in place. And it's having that information to hand, and actually that just gives reassurance in the end that you can
because as I've said, it's what we're not doing here is going, this doesn't work, see you later. We're not doing that. We're very much, these things aren't ideal, but let's look at this, let's look how we can improve it. So while the initial analysis might be a shock, it's quickly followed by positivity, and a return on investment, both in terms of cost, in terms of time, processing, etc. So a little easier to stomach.
And again, so obviously we've taken, you know, our audience through 3 stages so far. So at the very beginning, we've looked at the engagement part. We've who we're looking at, what stakeholders, whether that's internal, external, and how we look at that. We then look at the capture. We're trying to get that evidence, you know, sort of what does a real, you know, picture look of our organization and our function. And we've delved into the analysis. So we've effectively got some results, you know, we got to our, and what are we going to do with that results? And I think the next slide is where Michelle will hopefully explain the present stage. So do you want to take us through that, please, if you don't mind, Michelle?
Yep. So with the present stage, initially what we will have done is at the beginning we identified the deliverables. So the key part is to list out those deliverables and make sure that we've hit every single one of those. And the way that we can present that back to them is that yes, we can do a lovely presentation and we can go through the key summary points and an executive summary of the current and future state. But ultimately, what you also get is the evidence and the information. So all those lovely swim lanes we were talking about earlier, Jamie, and the process maps and your current state, and then the future ones, why you would do it because of your issues and risks, and all of that information is sort of an evidence report summary. And document pack that goes back to the customer so that they've got that information going forward to help them. But again, we do also present back and show them and talk through all of the points that we've captured so that there's a two-way conversation around what we've found and that we can answer further questions. So we don't just hand it back and then disappear. We continue to work with them and understand anything that we can help with going forward.
And from a standpoint of, you know, if I was to ask you, either of you, what would the sort of, if you could name 3 things that really stand out in this element, what would they be at this stage?
For me, it's about showing them that we've understood the business, we've understood the process, and it's quite evident that we've got that knowledge and that we're basing everything we're saying on facts that have been agreed by their own stakeholders. So there's that. There's 2, it's the possibilities. So, you know, there's these possibilities to be able to work with differently, to make changes or improve things to hit your objectives. And then 3, the benefits. So we try and also give them the benefits of making those changes and how that will either benefit them or, as someone mentioned earlier, the end customer and how that benefits your end users and end customers. So that's for me. What about you, Anthony?
No, I agree with those things. I think in terms of the 3 things that typically stand out from a return perspective or that make people sit back, I think it's time is number 1. The amount of time it takes, because you're buried in this every day. You don't really think about what goes on at each individual step until you take a step back and think about it, and that's the point of this process. And I think when people see it on the screen in front of them, that getting the invoice from there to there takes all of this communication, all of this time, all of this complexity without very little control and visibility over it. Often time is the thing that stands out with regards to how inefficient it is for that particular operation. That's the biggest deliverable I think that we offer, and again is important why we get the first bit of this right from an engaging perspective to define those deliverables.
And I think we're going on to sort of the last slide in the deck, if you like, before we sort of go sort of more in-depth chat. And I'm going to make a statement here. I don't know whether you mentioned it earlier, Anthony, and I suppose you're looking for current state, you analyse, then you're looking for a future state, which Michelle will explain in a second. But my question to both of you is software always the solution? Question.
No.
No. or no and yes. So no, software isn't always the solution, not the solution that we necessarily propose, although software that you already have could be the solution. So it could be, whilst being on site and seeing the technology that you already have, actually making some adaptations or different changes in that area might be something that we could offer. So no, sometimes it's just taking out a step because you've understood what the impact would be, or making a small change in what you capture into your current technology. It's that. So no, new software isn't always the solution.
As much as that breaks my heart, it's true.
but I think that's what's refreshing. That's the reason why I wanted, before we go into this slide, I wanted to talk about that, because actually the whole point of a business process review and creating a roadmap is to try and get to, yes, a future state, but actually make sure it's relevant to the organization and the department, not that a salesperson is trying to sell a solution to. So yes, it might break your heart, Anthony, but at the same time, I think working with you a long time, and I know that your ethics and your approach at Crown have been that sometimes, as Michelle said, that actually it might not be a brand new solution. It might be to improve your processes and the solutions you already have. It could be training of people. It could be a whole array of things. What I think you do when you go through this process, you highlight where these areas of focus were. So, Michelle, do you want to talk us through this slide in terms of what this last step looks like, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually what you've got on the screen in front of you here is the executive summary. So there's so much information that you can give back to the key stakeholders and the project sponsor at the end. But ideally what you really want to do is just try and capture those key points for them. So yeah, this was your current state, and this was this is how much it's costing you. So that first box on the top right is all the facts around your current state, and then some of the analysis around it, so that we then get to the future state, which is saying, well, actually the proposed future state that we've given you would actually create a more automated process by this amount %. So it's actually giving as many clear facts as you can on your proposed solution in the future, and how that would work with them, whether that's cost based or time based, or being able to grow but without actually increasing your headcount. Whatever it is that you're trying to do in those teams is making sure that we've captured that, and it's as factual as can be in your future state. So we use this this slide in front of you is just to try and pull those key points together in an executive summary to present back at the very end.
Lovely.
And as we've touched on, there is no obligation to buy any technology at the end of this process, whether we recommend it or not. We do offer technology to automate processes, etc., but that is not our objective here. It's to provide a document that the customer owns. It's their intellectual property. It's theirs to do what they like with. If they decide to use that and throw it in a bin and move on, if they decide to go and invest with another software house, if they decide to implement part of it as phased approach, it's entirely their decision. Of course, we would love to be involved in the process beyond the point of a business process review, but there is genuinely no obligation. And between Michelle and I, we ensure that what we give back is something that's going to add value, regardless of whether that falls into us as a service or not. But it's important to note that the document that is presented and is owned by you, the customer. It's not owned by us. It's not ours. You own it. You keep it. You do what you like with it.
Lovely. And I think you're right, actually, there, Anthony. I think that the whole, if you like, the sell of this as a process or a service is one thing, and then the outcome is a totally different thing. And again, as you've reiterated, that far too often organizations forget this stage. They go straight to solution. This will fix my process. This will fix my problem. And it's a done to. It's a chief exec or a CEO's bought it, pushed it down. And unfortunately, AP and procure to pay folk have to handle the consequence. So this, if you go back to the beginning of the journey, if you like, when we were talking about this, it's so important to, let's go back and reiterate, the engagement part is what are we trying to do? Who are we trying to achieve? What, you know, what are we trying to do from this project before you get done to, if you like. The capture side obviously is where you're analysing, you're going through that data, which overlaps into the analytical side, and then hopefully the results of the presentation, which you've absolutely articulated here, are, you know, the future state is what you expect it to look like and what you want it to be, rather than a done to environment. And do you find that when you're going in to do these, it's like a breath of fresh air, because ultimately people feel a bit more engaged? Is that how it works?
Absolutely.
Yes.
And also, if they take this information and then they go on to apply those changes, and whether that be a software solution or just changes to the process, those key stakeholders have been a part of that decision making already. They've given their expertise and their information to shape it. So it makes the next process, part of the process, so much easier. If you think about the whole change curve, it's you're already a lot longer further down that curve already, because they've been so involved in this stage.
I've been involved in projects in the past where we've sold software and not done these business process reviews. And the thing that kills it is not the lack of technology. It's not the lack of investment. It's not a lack of visibility as to what's happening. It's actually the user uptake, because the reality is nobody took the time or the interest to figure out what the end users actually need, what the end users actually want. That's a big part, and I mentioned it earlier in this masterclass. It's a big part of this. They've got to be included. They're a big part of it. It can't be successful without them. And again, it's not designed to replace them. It's designed to help. And getting them in from the get-go, right from the beginning, understanding it, and then getting them involved in the presentation piece, and getting them to critique us, because Michelle and I don't get it right all the time. We walk in with these documents and somebody will stick their hand up and say, you've not understood that correctly, or that's not where we were going with this. You know, we're not going to get it right 100%. It's up to the customer to challenge us so that we can make those changes so it does fit what you need at the end of the day. And if that need is a piece of technology, then another point is that you've got the blueprint of what you need. Because how many times has anybody listening to this gone to a software sales guy who has said, yeah, we can do that, yeah, we can do that, yeah, we can do that, and then 6 months later you realize that that was a crock of BS. The reality is, here is a document, I want you to deliver that, and I'm going to sign a contract for your software that means you're going to deliver this, and if you don't, I'm not going to pay you. Watch how many software sales guys suddenly stop saying, yes, it is, yes, it is, yes, it is. And that's a comfort factor that this process brings you if and when you do decide to go into the market to find something else.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that the reason why we've called this a masterclass, not only because we're running a series of these into next year, is because one of the biggest challenges in accounts payable is the voice. Getting a voice and expressing your voice. And I think that what I've heard today is, obviously, yes, there's a structured approach, you know, a 4-stage approach, but actually the end result is a voice. It is something you can, you know, architecturally go to somebody and say, look, these are our findings, this is what we're trying to achieve, and this is what other organizations will be doing. And that's where I think working with yourselves, because you work with different industries, that's where you get that balanced approach. And there is a question, actually, it's okay to ask you both. Does this apply across every industry? Is there an industry that you don't work with, or is it very much across all industries the same approach?
All industries, same approach. We very much focus on a horizontal business approach. So to be blunt, our strategy from a sales perspective is to work with departments rather than industries. Because if you think about an accounts payable process, and Michelle has spoken about this already, principally, whether you're a law firm, whether you're a manufacturing, whether you're a public sector, whether you're a private sector, whether you've got 2 invoices or 200,000 invoices, principally you're trying to achieve the same thing. Invoice comes in, you're trying to pay it. There's different nuances that make up that process, but the principles of what you're trying to do are the same. So the answer to the question is, there is no one vertical that we don't work in, that frankly, between Michelle and I in 20+ years haven't touched on, and we'd welcome any one of those conversations.
Lovely. And again, another question that's come in is, you know, as I think I mentioned earlier, it can be quite daunting to start a business process review. You know, you've got to be quite brave. You've got to be, you know, open the doors a little bit too. But if you're an AP manager and you're watching this, whether one of the, you know, the people watching it live or somebody's watching this back, what should they do? Should they reach out to you and say, look, we're stuck, what should we do? What do you normally find when you engage with somebody? I know there's a structured approach, but is there a suggestion? How would they do that? What's the starting point for them?
Very casual conversation. And that can be over the phone, it can be a physical meeting, but ultimately it's a very casual, open conversation with no obligation to do anything, just to help us paint a picture as to what they see the problems currently are, what their frustrations are, what their objectives are, and then that enables Michelle and I to give them a little bit of insight as to how we might be able to help, what that might look like commercially, what that might look like from a time perspective, and start to build out. I mean, it's kind of like a pre-engage, if that makes sense. So you've got that engage piece, but that typically happens once somebody's made the decision to move forward with a business process review. There's a pre-engage before that, which, again, similar to the software piece, no obligation to buy anything. It's a very high-level conversation that just gives us both the confidence that we can help, the specifics of where we can help, and what the impact of the business to the business that might be, both in terms of time and commercials.
Yeah. And then there's another point here. So obviously, because the whole masterclass is entitled the AP roadmap. I'm assuming that the outcome of the roadmap, like you've already said, it could be that it's not a solution. It could be that it could highlight some inefficiencies in the way that people are trained, brought in, the starters leavers process. So all of these things, as you're going through, will be uncovered, no doubt. And from a perspective of the white paper you spoke about earlier, Anthony, how do people get that? I know it's on our website, for instance, but I thought that was quite a good, I didn't grammatically thought you were pretty spot on with that one. I don't think I could have written it better myself, but how do they get that? It's on your website, it's on our website. No doubt we'll probably give this away as a downloadable feature. Shall we, as it's sort of towards the end of this masterclass today?
Yeah, anybody that's attended the masterclass, happy to share that with them. Access to it via our website, via your website, etc. There's other documents on there as well relevant to the AP process, both in terms of a solution, what the solution might do for you and what that might look like from a technology perspective, but also more generic reasons as to why you should do this and why, if you don't, what the impacts might be. Not just purchasing technology, but understanding your business processes. So there's a lot of thought leadership, which is very much what we're about. Ultimately, we're a sales organization. I want to sell stuff. It's called a spade, but we want to do it in a way that's informative, that's collaborative, that's transparent, and that's relative to what it is that you're trying to achieve. So a lot of the material that we present is very consultative approach, rather than it does this, do you want to buy it, yes or no? And we want that feedback. Anybody that's listened to this masterclass, it's important to us, is this relevant? Is it relevant? Is it not? Is this something that people, there is a gap? We want to hear from people. It doesn't have to be we want to buy something. It could be, do you know what, for some feedback, that didn't make much sense to me, but I'd like to understand this, I'd like to understand that, or it was really good.
Hopefully the latter, but I think you're right. I think the idea that this is why we're quite keen to do masterclasses and the new wave and the new approach to this, because you're right that AP managers get, they've probably been working in an organization for a period of time. They're very unsure what's going outside in the open world. It's good to just explore what's going on, if nothing else. So I think we would implore them to come and have a conversation with yourselves, at least that informal chat about what the process looks like. Yep, give you some feedback, see whether the blue and the black works together, Anthony, I don't know. But actually, you know what, the really important part is it's that feedback, isn't it? You can't continue to help businesses in the way you do without feedback from our audience and etc. But also, it'd be lovely to come back in the series and maybe talk about a customer journey, somebody who's gone through this process and the success factor. So if I could welcome you back at maybe early part of next year and we talk about a customer success, if that's okay with you both.
Absolutely, yeah.
Great idea. I think that people will take it what's the word I'm looking for? It will resonate much more if you've got an AP manager standing here saying, do you know what, this did work. Here are the reasons why. Here are the things that I was uncomfortable with, but actually those things that were presented to me as uncomfortable were quickly made comfortable by the solution and whatever that solution might be. So yes, absolutely, bang up for that. Yeah, hopefully it will be one of the customers that we're virtually speaking with right now.
Absolutely. And before we wrap up today, because we're coming to sort of the hour section now, is there any final words of wisdom, anything you'd like to, before we go into sort of the next part of this series, before we leave the business process review? Michelle, I'll hand over to you first.
I'm going to use the words of wisdom that aren't actually my own. And I know I've mentioned this to you before, Jamie, but they are actually Bill Gates, which are any automation applied to an inefficient process just magnifies inefficiency. And that's what this business process review is all about, is let's just take away all of the rest of the solution. Let's look at the processes, break them down and make them as efficient as possible. Then we want to move into, digitization and further on. That's great. We're starting at a really good point, and that's what I would say.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And Anthony?
That this is a journey that has bumps in it. It takes time. For lots of different reasons, people are looking at processes now, mainly because they're thinking about going digital. And all I will say is, it's complex. It's not easy. It takes time. What you should be looking for is not necessarily the what, i.e., what is it that I'm going to implement to solve my problems? It's understanding the why. That's the key question. Why? Why are we doing this? What's the benefit of it? And our business process reviews enable you to define that why without being obliged to then buy something as a consequence, without you doing your proper due diligence. It's a journey, as I've said. We're in it for the long haul. As a business, we're putting huge amounts of investment into this element of what we do, and we're keen for people to join us on that journey, and we're keen to support them and help them wherever we can.
Lovely. Well, look, we'll pull up to an end at that point. So thank you so much, Michelle and Anthony. Happy birthday, by the way, Michelle. I know that, I don't know, is it a glass of champagne or Prosecco tonight? I don't know. What is it?
It's definitely going to be a glass of champagne. I need to say it's champagne. It will probably be Prosecco. Yeah.
I think you should have a word with your boss and have a go at him for making you do this on your birthday.
Yeah, and not say happy birthday.
And yes, Anna, if he remembers. But look, and also the last comment I'll leave you with, which is from one of our members, has said, look, do myself and Anthony colour coordinate ourselves before we come on screen? No, we don't. We've got the same beard, the same hairstyle, but in terms of clothes, it was a complete, fluke. So thank you both for taking the time to take us through the masterclass today. I know our audience would have loved this, and no doubt we'll speak again on our next series in the new year at some point. So thank you both.
Can I just quickly say thank you to you and the team for helping set this up, and also to anybody that has taken the time to listen. Thank you for your time. Much appreciated.
Lovely. We'll end the broadcast there. So thanks for everybody for attending.
Cheers, Jamie.
Thank you.